"Security, we have a scammer attempting to take veteran benefits." The manager screamed, ripping the old man's military identification in two. The 86-year-old war veteran remained standing silent, tears on his worn face streaming, as people recorded his shame-obscene imitation. A woman spat at the same moment that the bank doors swung open, admitting a four-star general whose unmistakable rage distorted his features. What wartime secrets had this imposter war veteran concealed for half a century, and how would the revelation destroy those who had dared to humiliate him? Welcome to Deep Story Dispatch. James Jimmy Wilson adjusted high-faded Korean War veteran cap as he entered First National Bank on a crisp Tuesday morning at 86. His once powerful frame now moved with the measured shuffle of someone managing constant pain from decades-old shrapnel wounds. He never complained about the discomfort, not after what he'd witnessed on those frozen Korean hillsides. So many years ago, home was a modest one-bedroom apartment filled with meticulously maintained mementos of a life devoted to service every Sunday without fail. Jimmy polished his service medals displayed in a simple glass cabinet, treasures that held stories he never fully shared. His only family, a son who had followed his footsteps into military service, had been lost to an IED in Afghanistan in 2006. Since then, Jimmy lived a solitary existence at the local VFW hall. Younger veterans often overlooked him, his war too distant, his manner too reserved when directly asked about his service. He'd redirect the conversation with practiced ease. "Just did my duty," that's all he'd say, eyes focused on some distant horizon only he could see. Recent medical bills had depleted his modest savings, pushing him dangerously close to foreclosure. After weeks of preparation, Jimmy had finally completed his application for the Veterans Financial Assistance Program. His last hope to keep his home. The bank's fluorescent lights reflected harshly off Darren Phillips' designer watch as the 35-year-old manager reviewed Jimmy's paperwork. His expression soured immediately. Another veteran assistance application. Darren's tone carried unmistakable contempt. "We've been getting a lot of these lately." Jimmy stood patiently as Darren loudly questioned his documentation. "These records look unusual. I don't see proper digital verification codes. They're from 1953, Sir Jimmy explained quietly. "Convenient," Darren muttered loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Our system shows no immediate database match for your service records." Sarah Mitchell, a young loan officer, approached cautiously. "Mr. Phillips, many Korean War records aren't fully digitized. Perhaps we could not." "Now, Sarah," Darren cut her off sharply. "We have procedures." Other bank employees exchanged glances, some whispering about another fake hero within Jimmy's hearing. Customer service repeatedly misplaced his documents, requiring multiple visits. Wealthy clients were ushered immediately to private offices, while Jimmy waited hours for appointments. "Your service cap could have been purchased at any surplus store," Darren remarked dismissively, during one visit signaling a security guard to keep an eye on Jimmy. Today, Jimmy arrived with every required document for final approval. Darren examined his military ID under the bright lobby lights. "Mr. Wilson, this ID appears suspicious," he announced loudly. "The watermark doesn't match our verification standards." Several customers began filming on their phones. "Sir, we take stolen valor very seriously here," Darren proclaimed. "But I did serve Echo Company 1952. Jimmy began. "Anyone can memorize details from the internet," Darren interrupted contemptuously. Tears welled in Jimmy's eyes as he clutched the rejection letter. A younger customer joined in. "My father was a real veteran." "This is disgusting," Sarah whispered. "I'm so sorry." As Jimmy was escorted out by security the following day, Jimmy sat at his kitchen table staring at foreclosure notices and medical bills. 3 previous applications had already been denied for insufficient documentation, despite his providing everything he possessed. When he called the Veterans Affairs office, a sympathetic but overwhelmed representative confirmed what he already knew. Records for pre-digital era veterans were often incomplete or difficult to access. The regional VA support office had a 6-month waiting period for record requests. Jimmy simply didn't have many older veterans face similar challenges, the representative explained. "Our verification systems weren't designed with Korean War veterans in mind." Financial institutions increasingly flagged applications from elderly veterans as high fraud risk. National policy changes had eliminated documentation protections for pre-Vietnam veterans. Jimmy's multiple appeals to bank headquarters went unanswered for months. A buried newspaper article on the back pages detailed discrimination against elderly veterans by financial institutions, but generated little public interest. Meanwhile, across town, Darren boasted to colleagues during their morning meeting. Another valor thief shut down. He announced these old guys think they can just walk in with some ancient papers and cash in a leaked internal memo from the CEO encouraged stricter verification to prevent veteran identity fraud, prioritizing digital confirmation over physical documentation. Sarah Mitchell couldn't shake her unease about yesterday's interaction during her lunch break. She visited the county library's military archive section, drawn by something in Jimmy's demeanor that felt genuinely authentic. Searching through microfilm records, she discovered a partially redacted file with Jimmy's name. The document referenced something called Operation Forgotten, with most details heavily censored. One visible line mentioned a presidential unit citation awarded to an unspecified special operations group. Her grandfather, a veteran himself, recognized Jimmy's unit insignia from a secretive mountain warfare division when Sarah described it. Those boys weren't regular infantry, her grandfather said quietly. They went places no one talks about. Some missions still haven't been declassified. Sarah discovered an old newspaper clipping mentioning 12 missing soldiers rescued by an unidentified hero. The dates aligned with Jimmy's service period. Social media had already taken sides. A local Facebook group labeled Jimmy a suspicious character seeking military benefits, while comments questioned why a real veteran would be so reluctant to discuss his service. The local VFW post, dominated by Vietnam and Gulf War veterans, treated Korean War stories as ancient history, possibly exaggerated. Community members suggested Jimmy get a job instead of seeking handouts, ignoring his advanced age and physical limitations. A local newspaper editorial warned about the epidemic of stolen valor taking resources from real heroes, fueling public skepticism without investigation behind closed doors. Bank employees referred to elderly loan applicants as the entitled generation. Some customers had actually applauded Darren for protecting resources for real veterans. Jimmy's church group declined to help with his foreclosure, citing his uncertain military status as reason for hesitation. He overheard himself being called another old man. Pretending in military garb at the grocery store, a radio host ranted about welfare seekers wearing veteran caps for sympathy, further poisoning public perception. Sarah continued her investigation, finding Jimmy's name on a restricted memorial list not publicly displayed. She discovered references to General Robert Hayes, a renowned Korean War commander, connected to Jimmy's unit. In Jimmy's wallet, she noticed a handwritten note he'd briefly exposed while searching for identification mission, still silent. But Brotherhood endures. Jimmy's bedside drawer contained a sealed letter marked "Open only upon my death," a final testament to secrets kept for decades. When Sarah approached Aaron with her findings, he dismissed her concerns. Even if he did serve, which I doubt, his papers don't meet modern verification standards. Darren insisted we can't make exceptions based on sentimentality. But sir, what if we're wrong? Sarah pressed. The burden of proof is on the applicant. Darren replied, ending the conversation. Besides, I've already reported him to the veteran fraud hotline that evening. Jimmy sat alone contemplating the sealed letter in his drawer. For 70 years, he'd honored his oath of silence about operations that officially never happened. Now that same secrecy threatened to leave him homeless. He'd survived freezing mountain operations deep in enemy territory, but might be defeated by bureaucracy and databases that couldn't recognize the type of service he'd provided. How should we treat veterans from earlier conflicts, whose records may be incomplete or classified? Is our society failing those who served decades ago? Share your perspective. On respecting elderly veterans, Jimmy returned to First National Bank. One final time the following Monday, he carried nothing but a worn military photograph, its edges frayed from decades of handling. It was his last attempt before accepting defeat. The lobby fell silent as he entered his presence. Now notorious following social media circulation of his stolen valor confrontation, Darren emerged from his office immediately, clearly prepared for this moment. "Mr. Wilson," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we've confirmed with authorities that your application is questionable at best." The security guard positioned himself closer to Jimmy. Though the elderly man posed no visible threat, "We've contacted the veteran fraud hotline about your case, Mr. Wilson," Darren continued, straightening his expensive tie. "I suggest you leave before things become more embarrassing." Customers openly filmed the confrontation, One woman shook her head in disgust, whispering shameful fake just loudly enough to be heard behind the counter bank. Employees were already processing paperwork. For the foreclosure of Jimmy's small home, Sarah approached, clutching documents. "Sir, I really think we need to reconsider. We've seen enough." Sarah Darren cut her off sharply. "Security will escort Mr. Wilson out." Jimmy stood motionless, dignity intact. Despite the humiliation, his weathered hands held the photograph carefully, his eyes reflecting not anger but a profound sadness. "This is my unit," he said softly, though few bothered to listen. Just as the security guard reached for Jimmy's arm, the bank's double doors burst open with such force that the security alarm triggered everyone. Froze in the doorway stood a commanding figure in full military dress uniform, 4 silver stars gleaming on each shoulder. General Robert Hayes, now in his 90s but still radiating authority, strode into the lobby, followed by 2 uniformed aides. "Attention," he barked in a battlefield voice that made everyone instinctively straighten. The bank fell absolutely silent. "Which one of you is the manager general?" Hayes demanded. Darren stepped forward, suddenly uncertain. "I am Sir Darren Phillips is." "There, you've been harassing one of my men." Hayes interrupted, his voice like steel. He produced a folder stamped "Top Secret" in faded red letters. "James Wilson served under my direct command during the most classified operation of the Korean War." Darren's face drained of color as the general continued. "Sergeant Wilson, LED. A mission behind enemy lines to rescue 12 captured American soldiers. The details remain classified for national security reasons. Until recently, the general opened the folder revealing documents with presidential seals. Wilson received the Silver Star in a classified Pentagon ceremony. His unit conducted operations so sensitive their very existence was denied for 70 years. He held up a photograph showing a young Jimmy receiving a medal from President Eisenhower. This man carried 2 wounded soldiers 20 miles through enemy territory. On his back, Hayes continued, voice breaking slightly at the memory. "His records were sealed by presidential order. That's why they don't appear in your database." Darren stood speechless as the general approached Jimmy, placing a hand on his shoulder with profound respect. "His file crossed my desk last week when I was at the Pentagon signing his Medal of Honor recommendation," Hayes said, each word falling like a hammer on Darren's career while you were questioning his honor. "I was finalizing the nation's highest military recognition for his actions." Customers who had been filming the confrontation moments earlier now deleted their videos. In shame, the bank's CEO had arrived, summoned by the general's office, and immediately offered profuse apologies. Mr. Wilson never spoke of his heroism because his comrade's mission remains classified. Hayes explained he kept his oath of silence. For 70 years, Sarah quietly handed Jimmy a file, showing how many times he had been rejected despite having adequate documentation. His eyes reflected gratitude for her belief in him. When no one else would, Darren attempted to stammer an apology. "We had no way of knowing." "Yes, you did," the general interrupted. "You had his word as a soldier. That should have been enough." Jimmy finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. "I didn't come for recognition. I just needed to keep my home." General Hayes placed his hand on Jimmy's shoulder. "No more, old friend. The country remembers now. Is our society too quick to judge people based on appearances and database records? How can we ensure we don't humiliate those who served in increasingly forgotten conflicts? Share your thoughts on true respect versus automated verification." First National Bank immediately approved Jimmy's loan with preferred terms. Waiving all fees, the CEO issued company-wide policy changes for veterans of earlier conflicts, establishing the Wilson Protocol for handling pre-digital military records. Jimmy's story triggered a congressional investigation into treatment of pre-digital era veterans. Lawmakers discovered thousands of similar cases nationwide. Elderly veterans whose service records existed only in partially classified paper files. Darren was reassigned to compliance training focus, specifically on veteran verification processes. Sarah received a promotion to veteran service specialist at the bank's headquarters, developing training programs to recognize legitimate yet unusual service records. The National Banking Association developed legacy veteran verification standards, creating alternative pathways for elderly veterans to prove their service history. Jimmy's modest home was saved from foreclosure. Local veterans rallied to complete needed repairs, replacing the leaking roof and broken furnace. First National Bank established the Wilson Fund for veterans with incomplete documentation, providing bridge financing. While proper records were located, General Hayes launched a national campaign to identify other forgotten heroes whose classified operations had left them without adequate recognition. The Pentagon expedited declassification of certain Korean War. Special operations, a nation's character is measured by how it treats those who sacrifice during its darkest hours, became the campaign's rallying cry. Local schools initiated living history programs inviting Korean War veterans to share their experiences. Media coverage shifted from panic about stolen valor to recognition of forgotten heroes. Community members organized belated welcome home parades for Korean War veterans. 70 years overdue bank training now included sections on honor. Before verification, teaching employees to preserve dignity during the documentation process. The VFW headquarters established special recognition for pre-Vietnam veterans, acknowledging the unique challenges they faced, improving their service. Military historians documented previously classified operations, giving credit to participants whose contributions had been hidden for decades. 6 months later, Jimmy received the Medal of Honor in a White House ceremony. Former skeptical bank customers lined the streets when he returned to town now, understanding what quiet heroism looked like. Jimmy visited the local high school, finally telling his story publicly. "For the first time, I kept silent for my brothers who didn't come home," he explained. To students who listened in awed silence, their mission still protects you today. The former bank manager attended the ceremony, and Jimmy shook his hand. "We all make mistakes," he said simply. Sarah established a scholarship for children studying forgotten military history. The bank lobby now displayed photographs of local veterans, including a young Jimmy in his mountain warfare uniform. The final scene showed Jimmy at the VA hospital, visiting other forgotten Korean War veterans. The greatest honor isn't the medals, he told students, it's serving alongside heroes whose names you'll never know. Heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unhonored. Have you ever discovered someone's remarkable past that made you see them differently? Has someone's untold story ever made you reconsider judgments you'd made? Share your experience in the comments. Subscribe to follow more stories about vindication, recognition, and the silent heroes history almost forgot at American Valor Stories. We don't just tell stories, we restore honor. This is where forgotten warriors receive long overdue justice, where a lifetime of silence finally finds a voice, and where you, the viewer, can witness the moment when respect is properly given. If your heart has ever stirred at the sight of delayed recognition, join us.